Horseplayers Happy Hour. It's a special show today on Horseplayers Happy Hour. This is our Saratoga opening day show. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal. Very happy to be here in the same state for the second week in a row as our almost every week co-host on this program from the other side of the great state of Maine. You know him from his own eponymous podcast, the fantastic work he does for NBC. He is TV's Matt Bernier. Matt, what's going on?
It's happening, Pete. Happy opening day, Saratoga. It's always fun. I was telling you right before we came on, it's just before 1 o'clock. I'm upstairs in the living room. Baby's a little bit fussy. And I go, well, at least we got the opener up at the spot. And I pick it up on the screen and it's a deluge. It's dark. It's pouring sideways. And I go, I hope this is just going to, come and go. And sure enough, it looks like a Saratoga thunderstorm because right now it looks beautiful up there from what the camera would suggest.
It blew through. It wasn't anything too bad, it looks like. I mean, I was thinking there was a chance they'd change course condition, but there's also a chance they're just keeping it fast and firm because it doesn't look like it's come back from the bits and bobs that I've been watching. You talk about making it rain. Well, in the race that just crossed the wire at Saratoga, it was number 3, Winter Sun, who made it rain. Horse that's going to have some big implications in our contest today, scoring at 43-1. Was that what I saw?
Yeah, I believe so. So, I mean, you're looking at a horse that's going to pay almost $100. Big picture, I would say anyone that has this one is in good shape as far as the contest is concerned. I would venture a guess, though, could be an interesting case study. I'd be curious, and we'll find out in a minute when the leaderboard updates. This is sort of that overcapper that we've talked about in the past. Horse pays $89 to win, $26 to play. So a capper on both sides. But an overcap horse, the philosophy of, I don't want to go just to 20-1 because everybody's going to be looking at that. If you move above that to a horse that's going to be north of that number, you figure some certain people are going to be deterred because you don't get the added benefit of, let's say in this case, the extra, $40 it may be for the capper. There could be fewer people playing the horse because of that. And who knows, maybe that played out this way. We'll find out.
We'll see what happens. And let's start. We have all levels of contest player on here. Some people playing in contests who don't usually play in contests who want to support us here for Horse Player Happy Hour. And we'll get to the specifics of a little bit more of the specifics of who we are and what we do. But let's start with a very basic question. Explain the concept of the cap on the leaderboard and its purpose.
Yeah, so a cap in any of these $2 mythical tournaments, whether it's live or pick and pray, on the win end, it caps at, they both cap at 20-1 and 10-1, I believe.
Yep.
So you can get $42 on the win end, $22 on the place end. And the logic behind it is you don't want to have one horse that goes out there and pays that horse right there, $89, and blows everything up, or in some cases even more, I believe. And you would know the history of it. This was implemented after a horse that paid something like $200 in a contest in Connecticut.
Frisk Me Now, the 1996 Hutchison. And I think it was the old Auto Tote contest where everyone, I think it might have even been a multi-day contest, and every single person who participated in the prize pool backed this impossible long shot just because the price he was on the board. And I think people took a look and said, maybe there's a better way.
Yeah, and you still are rewarded for thinking outside the box and finding a horse that will return $64 as far as your contest is concerned. But if you don't have the horse, it's not the end-all, be-all. You at least still, in theory, have an opportunity to claw back from that. So I think you have to have a cap in many of these things. And the reason there is no cap in a live money contest is because it's just that. You're betting the horse. Right. So we're talking about apples to oranges in the big picture. But as far as our contest is concerned, the Happy Hour Tour, or any of these other $2 mythical win place ones, I think personally a cap is it's not useful. That's the wrong way to put it. It's a necessary tool or a necessary means in one of these events to prevent things from just kind of going sideways.
One of the big things about contests is trying to preserve the luck to skill ratio, and also trying to, as much as possible, make people play horses that they like. And look, there's no way of avoiding this at the end of $2 win place contests. A lot of times when they're in a live format, unlike our pick and pray format where all the picks are in beforehand. But sometimes you're going to pick a horse. There's no handicapping involved. I needed 12-1. Who's the best horse over 12-1 to get me where I need to be? I get that. But the more that you can diminish that and make people play horses they actually like, the better off we are. That's the reason for the cap in a nutshell, very well explained by you. Do we have a leaderboard yet? Do we have a leaderboard for this week? I'm curious to see how many people had that thing.
I would think it's got to be, as I'm pulling it up here. We have an updated leaderboard, and if I am looking at this correctly, there was one person that had this horse.
Whoa! Out of 165?
One person out of 164 entries, Steve Nemitz.
Good for Steve Nemitz,
had
a veteran player coming up with that one. Well, that's great. That's great news for everybody else because, of course, our contests are a little different. We talked. Every contest has different format. One of the things you need to do, first and foremost, anytime you're playing any contest, read and understand the rules because they're all a little bit different. And as Dave Gutfreund told me years ago, in the winning contest player, all contests are just a game with numbers. And the more, if the rules are the same for me as everybody else, I'm pretty much happy and interested in playing, assuming the value is there in one shape or another. So this contest is really like 3 different contests in one at a minimum. At a basic level, people put up their $20, and the top 10% will win their $179 seats to the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge qualifier on Saturday. So goal number 1, finish in the top 10%. And then hopefully you move on to that qualifier. And from there, you can win a $10,000 prize in the form of a BC seat. But then, of course, there's this tour element. And unlike some other tours that sort of force you to play maybe more than you want to play in pursuit of what's available in the prize pool, I think we've constructed it in such a way where you have an opportunity to participate in some level in the prize pool, honestly, even if you only play 1 week and have a really good week.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way this thing is set up, each week, the top 2 finishers automatically move on to the playoffs, what we have. And we'll get into the playoffs in a little bit. But the top 10 finishers week in and week out will accumulate points toward the regular season point total. Whoever has the most points at the end of the regular season will win a full $10,000 BC seat. But I brought up the playoffs. If you finish inside the top 2 any week, you automatically move on. But based on a certain percentage, and I believe it's 80 when all is said and done, when we get to the very end, or maybe it's 100, we can go back and fact check on that. But for the playoffs, if you finish inside that number as far as the points are concerned, you also qualify for the playoffs. And at the end of it, week by week, we whittle it down basically half at a time until we get to a final table. And at the end, the winner of the final table also earns a $10,000 BC seat. So you're playing, to your point, it's kind of 3 contests within one each and every week. And if for whatever reason you do miss a week, it's not the end all be all, or I shouldn't say that. It could be. Anything can happen. But you at least feel like you have bought yourself a little bit of flexibility where for whatever reason you can't play on a weekend or you forget about it. You at least have other chances down the road to make up for that.
Yeah, you try to get those scores that are going to be your overall tour points. And, of course, the overall tour champion getting the BC seat, getting one of the 2 added to the prize pool, and then the playoffs providing the other one. So we think it's kind of clever. People seem to enjoy it. We thank you all for playing, watching along. If you missed this week, don't worry. We're going to come back with another All-Saratoga format next Thursday. I think we've already decided this. We want to give this one another go and see what kind of support it can get. So mark your calendars for next Thursday, and then we'll be here from 4 to 5 as well. Let's do some leaderboard check-ins. AJ, I also sent you via text the overall tour leaderboard. Now, thank you to the 15 people who pointed out that the leaderboard I had been reading out had been an old, dated one that we had unfortunately uncovered. But we've got the new one all created. It's all set. It's going to be updated now every week, and we can share it every week now that we're getting down to the business end of our Horseplayer Happy Hour series. So we'll get to that. But let's look at the current leaderboard in this week's contest, see which players are on their way to maybe getting some tour points. We'll start with Steve Nemitz, who did have that 3-runner there in the last race at Saratoga at the Big Balloons price. John Buckley, Michael Cavana, Michael Oldham, Bruce D'Agostini, Pete Dressens, Kirk Rockwell, Pete Cook, Matthew Abbott, Amanda Couples, Nancy Spence, Ernest Hay Jr., Stephen McNatton, Trenton DeWitt, Togo Travaglia, Emmett Burns, and there's a bit of a scrum in 16th. I'll read them all. Joe Petrella, Michael Cavana again, and Steve Nemitz again. Steve Nemitz in very good position. So, yeah, the top 10% of these entries are going to advance to play on Saturday. The top 10 get tour points. And, yeah, soon, when I give producer AJ a chance to fiddle around and get that other link open and published in here, we'll look at who's doing well on the tour so far, and then we'll make some decisions, Matt. We're going to do something a little different content-wise during the show. We'll prep the viewers for it. We're going to do the Pick Six at Saratoga on Saturday. Who knows? With the last result we just saw, maybe, just maybe, it could be a 2-day carryover Pick Six on Saturday in Saratoga. Oh man,
I mean, we joked about it. I mean, that was the first leg of the late Pick 5, and you really don't need too much more chaos to at least spice some things up. I mean, if you're alive at this point, you're already thinking, if it chalks out for the next 4 legs, I've still got to be in decent shape for something.
We've got some breaking news here as well, and people are not going to believe this who listened to our Big Betters show with Sean Borman and JK, where Sean Borman first went on record and said, in this game, you have to be nimble. There are no absolute rules. There's no you should nevers. And then he came back 5 minutes later and said, you know what? I changed my mind. There's one you should never. You should never use all but one horse in the Pick Six. This is something that JK famously guilty of doing on a number of occasions. And he said he wasn't going to do it. Guess who just used all but one in that leg at Saratoga and got himself knocked out?
Oh, no.
Isn't that terrible? I mean, it's early in the sequence. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. And he's claiming it was some sort of clerical error. So, we'll go easy on the guy. We'll go easy on the man. But it's
That's
just
rough,
funny.
Man. That is rough.
It's not good.
I agree with the logic, though. That don't use a horse that you don't like. Even if it is, if you like,
you would do that. You would leave out one.
I mean, I don't want to use horses I don't like. I mean, I hate to, and I know that can end up biting me in the rear end. It happens to me more frequently than not with shorties than long prices, which I guess is probably an indictment on me for leaving out the 3 to 1 shot.
I actually think there's a much better case to leave out a favorite than
That's
a
fair.
40 to 1. The problem with leaving out a horse like that is if you're using the other 11 or however many were in the race, you're saying I don't have an opinion. So for that minor outlier chance that horse is going to win, there's more value probably including than excluding. I think it's different, especially if you're leaving out a short priced favorite. That means that reflects an opinion. You hate that horse,
Yeah,
So
no, you're right. You're right. And maybe I'm being a little unkind to myself, but I feel like I outsmart myself more often than not in those kind of instances. But also partially because I personally don't like to play. I don't like to put a ton into tickets. I don't want to put, as far as capital is concerned, I don't like playing, multi-$100 plays. I'm going to play a pick 4 or a pick 5. I want to put in $100-$150 and feel like I've put together a good ticket. And sometimes it does come back to bite me in the rear end. This race that we'll talk about, race number 7, the first race, I believe, going out of the new chute, the new old chute, however you want to say it. There's a horse in here that I don't like, and I know she would knock me out if I were playing any kind of a multi-race sequence. And she's very logical on paper. So, we can get into that in time. But I do feel like more often than not, I kind of get in my own way with those sort of things.
All right, let's get a look at that leaderboard as promised. Yeah, AJ, the one I texted you that says July 7th, that's the overall tour leaderboard, not the leaderboard for this contest. So yeah, let's go ahead and pop that one up there and see who's doing what as of last week. And then we will continue to get these updated. Can you punch in on the screen there? I can't read that little type. I'm getting old, AJ. There you go. That's much better. Thank you for that. Matthew Abbott, look at this. We got a great little race here at the top of these standings and very familiar names. Matthew Abbott is in a tie with Greg Kingma, who I met years ago at Saratoga. They've got 190, not far behind last year's second place finisher, who did end up punching his BC ticket through what you might call the traditional method, if I'm remembering that right, winning his way into a qualifier and getting a seat. Michael Domable, 170. Matt Volgi, who did the Race Lens preview with me of Saratoga. Folks should check that out, as well as that Big Better show if you're looking for more Saratoga preview content. Ernest Hay Jr., one of the loyalist listeners and longest signed on supporters that we have. Always good to see his name up there with 120. John Bowl at the century mark, along with Aurelio Garcia, Robert Henderson, and Kevin Walsh. And then we'll move down a couple more. We'll do Nathan Kaczynski at 90, Kirk Rockwell, John Gasper, who hopefully will be up in Saratoga a bunch this summer as he was last year. Speaking of people who fit that bill, Robert Capalbo and Scott McGovern. And I'll just do the final 90 person, who is Rob Novicki. Actually, I'll do the 80s too. I was guessing there were going to be more of them. CJ Arrigo, GT Nixon, Joseph Rumfolo, Tyler Sisk, and Patrick Lewis. Anyway, this leaderboard is available for all to see. I'll give you the URL on that one. It is just going to be breederscup.com/HHH-leaderboard. So easy to find for everybody. You can track your progress as the season goes along. As we get closer down to it, we'll try to figure out what we think where we think the cut line essentially is going to be for people to make their way into the playoffs. But I haven't gotten that far yet. I feel lucky just to have gotten the leaderboard up in time. We had to do some minor heaven and earth moving to make that happen. But we've got it now, man.
It would be like looking at the leaderboard today after round one of the Open and saying like, oh, well, I know, yeah, technically you can get an idea of what the cut could look like, but you have no idea what tomorrow's going to look like as far as conditions are concerned. There's no sense in trying to do that. It's too early. We got time.
We have a comment actually we can bring up from Kimbo. Great chat with Cam Smith, Matt, crazy price, and early days, of course, but looking good. How are you feeling about this pick?
Great. I mean, it was a little bit disappointing simply today because I had him at 40-1 for first round leader, and he's third, 3 off the lead right now. So good first round. And I think he's very live over the next few days. He's just that kind of guy that I think, especially in the conditions like this, and not to go way on a tangent, but you were just over in Scotland. I don't know if it's that dry everywhere or it's just that dry in St. Andrews, but it is like an absolute runway out there. It's browner than brown. I love it. So unusual. It's the sort of thing that I love. You know, you've got guys that are relatively modest length off the tee, and they've got balls running out an extra 100 yards. Like, it's fantastic. And the reason that plays over there is because you've got all these little pot bunkers situated in random spots, and they just eat your ball. So, yeah, great. All of a sudden, you get an extra 100 yards off the tee. But if it rolls into one of those pot bunkers, it's effectively a stroke and a half penalty. So I love it. Cam Smith's from Australia. He grew up playing kind of linksy style courses. I feel pretty good after day one.
Nice stuff. Very, very, very good
work. We had him at 28-1 for overall. So
no, not bad at all. Not bad at all. There's got to be shorter than that now with that terrific first day.
I think 7.5-1.
Yeah, there you go. So we've had, I've seen a ton of questions on Twitter, and I'm glad Brian pops this one in here. And maybe we'll fold this into a discussion of this upcoming race. What are your thoughts, Matt, about the new mile shoot? Do you think it might favor inside speed?
Yeah, so my initial inclination was that I wanted to be looking for horses that were either clearly confirmed speed or were going to be down toward the inside. And then I was reading some of the quotes. I apologize if it wasn't Dave Grenning, but I think it was Dave Grenning's article in the Daily Racing Form after they ran that sort of little trial with the 6 horses and the 6 riders. And almost all of them, or I shouldn't say almost all of them, came back and said they thought it was very fair, that it was not like, and forgive me, I don't know this because it was a million years ago. It feels like I didn't even know they had another shoot that they used to run out of in the late 80s and maybe even years before. So they said this is a much different scenario than that. It feels like you have a legitimate amount of time to get some kind of position before you turn onto the backside. I'm still inclined during these early days to look for horses that are going to be forward and be able to clear over. Part of the reason I like who I like in this race coming up. But honestly, because we have no data, it's probably going to be a little bit of a wait and see approach. But personally, I am still looking at that. I want speed or horses toward the inside.
It's the universal bias of dirt racing, isn't it? So why should it be any different, right? That's the way I look at it. Now, from what I understand of the history, and that was some terrific reporting by and it was Dave Grenning in the pages of our old employer, the Daily Racing Forum. Looking to get Dave on In the Money maybe next week. Going to have him join us to do some baby talk back this summer in a big way, sponsored by our friends at Gainesway. Looking forward to those shows very much. But I guess when the shoot was a real shoot, that was the day. That was 50 years ago. That was 1972. And then I do think there were a series of races in, maybe it was early 90s. I don't know how long the time span went, but I guess that was like a very jacked up situation where they sort of had a shoot, but there was no shoot. So they're like, I got the impression there was essentially no running rail. So horses were breaking in, and it was a whole big, and then, having to aggressively get back, and it was very dangerous. And Angel Cordero, I know, was not a fan. John Velasquez who must have been very young if he ever rode in that thing. But there was a quote for him saying, how messed up that one was. And I think there was a lot of fear that would be the case this time. But based on that trial race, jocks seem, perfectly content. One of the big decisions coming out of today is how many are going to be allowed to run these. I'm hoping they can run 10, because it's a lot more interesting from a betting point of view than running 8. And then I think it's important to point out, just because I think a lot of people don't realize this, they think, well, why are they doing this? This is to avoid that weird situation with the mile and a 16th races, where for the older horses, they go to a mile and an 1/8 on the dirt. And then for the babies, they go to 7 furlongs when the mile and a 16th comes off. So I think in addition to having another just distance and another option, they're hoping this is going to make those turf fields, when they go off turf, hold together a little better. Because as we know, sort of racetrack economics 101, bigger fields, everybody makes more money. It's better for every single participant. I guess maybe you could say, in a small picture of life, a trainer might say, well, I have less of a chance to win. An owner might say, I have less of a chance to win if it's a big field. But at the end of the day, we're running for purses here, and the purses are going to be bigger. So really, in my view, everybody wins. So I think it's a really interesting innovation. Again, I expect the universal bias of dirt racing speed to be important. I don't see any reason to treat it any differently from this far out. We'll see. And we should talk about this race, because there's just 5 minutes. I will say, after this race, we're going to do a reset, and we're going to do that thing where we double up our Horseplayer happy hour stuff with our late week players podcast appearance. We're going to do that Saturday, Belmont Pick 6. And hey, if you're listening, ask questions while we go along. Give us your thoughts. Let's incorporate this loyal, impressive array of Horseplayer happy hour talent into the other broadcast as well. So feel free to hit us up with questions about the last 6 races at Saratoga on Saturday. We'll get that all sorted out. But meanwhile, in this first race of the Wilson Shoot, Matt, who do you like?
I'll go very quickly, because then I'm going to follow it up with a question for you. I did go with what I expect to be the speed in here, Longitude, the 4, for Brad Cox, Joel Rosario. I thought the most recent run was solid enough, all things considered. Yes, it was a perfect trip, but I like the way that the horse finished. And I do believe this one should be forwardly placed. I'll be curious to see how far this one wants to go. That was my only real reservation. I think stacks up quite well numbers-wise, but pedigree-wise, there's a lot of sprint in here. And I just wonder if we're going to get to that final furlong, and maybe that becomes, a little bit too much to ask, but the price is right at 6-1. So I'm looking at it from a speed standpoint. And I'll just roll in the question. Do you think there's a scenario, knowing the way horses continue to be sort of campaigned leading into a Breeders' Cup, do you think there's a scenario that in years to come, that final weekend, let's say Labor Day weekend, the mile races at Saratoga become de facto preps for the 1 mile, the 2-turn dirt mile races for the Breeders' Cup, as opposed to having to prep going long, or having to prep in a 6 furlong race and either stretching back or turning back?
I think it's a really interesting notion that I hadn't thought about. It's certainly appropriate to talk about on this show that's so Breeders' Cup focused. And of course, in the old days, the idea of a horse waiting that long between races would be crazy. But these days, it's become more of the norm. I think it's an interesting hypothesis, and we'll see how it plays out. Hopefully, this course is a success, and it'll draw more support from horses and from horsemen and jockeys and everyone associated with the industry, bettors, crucially, and we can have an opportunity to see what this thing can turn into. As for this race, I'm with you on wanting a speed horse. I just think Tarabi looks much more likely to me to prove the best of speed when they really get engaged in here. Now, I think you've got a reasonable alternative, and you've certainly got a much bigger price with Angitude, but I just thought it looked like all systems go. I think Tarabi's supposed to move up in the second start off the layoff. Form of these races has been working out pretty well. And then a couple of horses that I wanted to use and mess around with at prices to maybe get in there with her, and I'll use your Angitude as well. But Gino Romantica, I thought, was a little bit interesting as a horse that isn't too far behind on numbers and is a pretty rock solid price. And I also thought that Favor was one that made sense. Favor running at Pimlico on one of those days where it certainly seemed like the inside was the place you wanted to be, and being very wide, and now getting a situation where, especially maybe if the 4 and the 7 hook up a bit in this spot, could get a really nice sit off the speed and finish past them. So I'll probably end up, I'm going to key to Robbie in here, and I'll mess around with the 2, the 4, and the 6 as well. I might just do a smaller, lazy, little boxy thing with those, if those 3 price horses can manage to get the exacta, to at least get my stake back if I'm half right in the spot. So maybe Dutch those. You surprised at the money the 1 is taking in here, Matt? Goddess of Fire. I mean, I suppose she's supposed to be around this price.
Yeah, I'm not terribly surprised. She was actually the one I was alluding to when I said I tend to get too cute in these instances, and it's a short number that I don't like. I've never been all that impressed by her. I know she does have a fig if you just want to go purely on the number in that Gulfstream race 2 back. That is more than capable. Arguably, would make her the horse to beat in here. I just don't think that race at Gulfstream was very good, if we're being honest. And aside from that is the outlier on her page. She doesn't have a fig that is remotely close to that in her other races. She continues to take support. I wonder if it is just a product of seeing KY Oaks G1 in there. And again, she could win, especially if this thing ends up heating up. Let's say Longitude and Tarabi end up really throwing it down and they duke each other into a bit of a duel. Maybe Goddess of Fire comes rolling on at the end. Of the 2 Pletchers, I actually preferred the outside runner, Amo Ray.
Interesting. What was your case on Amo Ray, a runner that managed to prevail last time, despite not the easiest trip for sure. I was worried maybe a little light on figures is all.
Yeah, and totally fair, and that's why I didn't end up really going this route. But I kind of thought, as unimpressive visually as that run at Laurel was to me, to my eye, I wanted to give her some bonus points for actually digging down and then actually drawing away at the end, because it looked like at the top of the lane she could end up running 3rd. So for her to do that off the bench, it felt like a starting off point. I could see an improved effort here, and just purely, kind of comparing the numbers, 2.5 to 1 on Goddess of Fire or 6 on this filly. I'll gamble on this filly taking a step forward than on Goddess of Fire being the 94 buyer she earned in the Gulfstream race, especially at 2 times the price or 2.5 times the price.
I think that's a completely fair assessment. We'll see how it plays out on track. They're taking their time here a little bit, milling about. It's been post time for a minute, and I think we're going to have at least another minute before we get things started. Feel free to hit us up out there with any questions you might have. This is an excellent time to fill when we can't get too into any topic. But we can do a little bit of sneak preview for next week, I suppose. We got winning you're in action coming from both sides of the Atlantic. You and I will both be down at Monmouth Park for Haskell Day, and hoping that as part of Horseplayer Happy Hour, maybe we can preview not just the Haskell, but some of those other exciting stakes races as well on that card.
Yeah, we're going to have the United Nations. I know the plan has been for Tripuven to go there for Chad Brown to try to repeat in that race, add another grade 1 to his resume. I haven't seen any other listed probables, but I have seen some names floating out for the Haskell. And if they all show up, I think it's going to be a really, really good race. I talked about it 2 weeks ago on my show about the potential for this Breeders' Cup Classic. I mean, this Haskell, just purely on the numbers that the horses have earned already, it's got to be one of the faster Haskells in many, many years. And it doesn't mean that they're all going to run that well next Saturday. But I'm just, can you remember when was the last time we had this many 3-year-olds run this fast, this early? I know they've done a number of different things, but boy, I think this is a pretty fast group.
Yeah, Street Sense year. I mean, that's
yeah,
like the first
that was my thought. 07.
Yeah. I think that might be it. And that was obviously a pretty famous crop, as it turned out. This is really cool. We just saw the head-on angle of how they're doing this, where they're leaving a path between the first horse to break and this little temporary rail guiding structure. It's very unlike anything I've really ever seen, honestly, how they're doing this. But it seems well designed and done with the consultation of the riders, as you see it right there, to try to assure as fair of a start as possible for everybody. And they're off here. Let's see, one race sample, but let's see if it can if we can get a clean run onto the proper backstretch. Oh, I wish we could see a head-on that angle, but it looked normal enough to me. You see anything odd there?
No, I mean, if we're being honest, doesn't it seem a little bit like Belmont?
I guess you're right. It's just they have the full on. It was just.
And let me rephrase that. When I say Belmont, the turf, obviously, not the turf.
Yeah. But it is. It's just. I didn't even think. I mean, that's such an obvious comparison that had somehow eluded my brain to make myself here. But yeah, it looked. I mean, the start looked fair. I'd love to see more on the head on, but it didn't look like anybody was compromised. And the riders have been really encouraged to give their opinions here. Meanwhile, on the track, the race is playing out a bit like we said we thought it might, with your runner out there and my runner stalking you, and then a host of chances in behind. It's hard to know what times mean, but if 48.70 is correct, I think we both have a very good chance of being there throughout. What do you think?
If Longitude can't win with this setup, she's never going to beat Tarabi.
Right.
Now, maybe the distance bites her. And Joel has ridden her very conservatively. So he's either got a ton or he's terrified of the distance. it's and she just can't get the distance. But, I mean, that was as candy a setup as it gets. And, by the way, Todd's going to try to run both of us down.
I know this is going to be tight. I think Tarabi might have a little up the sleeve. Let's see as we get to the wire. Yeah, it comes 7-1 for my exacta gets messed up there. Typical, but a good run from Tarabi, and a race that, I mean, what the clock suggested may be right, the way we saw that play out on paper, and a very big run from Warlike Goddess, Goddess of Fire, who comes back from the Oaks. Obviously, that cut back agreed and seemed to have the tougher trip flow-wise than either of the top two, and still nearly ran them both down. So you'd think you'd be seeing some better stuff from her as we proceed with this Saratoga meet.
I would think also I don't know what Todd will have off the top of my head, but I mean, I could see her at 1.25 miles in the Alabama. She feels like a grindy type. I don't know necessarily if that's where they're going to want to go with her, but she to me is that kind of filly that, all things considered, longer is probably better for her. She's going to have to run in some big names in a race like that, but I don't know where else where you'd really want to go with her.
It's an interesting point. I mean, part of me says that this distance agreed with her so much, but you look at the running style, you look at the pedigree, and you just look at what the logical spots are and what's going to make her worth the most money. She still needs that grade 1 win to really maximize her value. So, you're either going to cut back to the test or go out to the Alabama. And with those two options, maybe going out does make the most sense, though. I certainly like the added punch that she had cutting back.
And as far as Tarabi goes, I thought this was a good effort. I think she goes to the test from here, I would assume. I don't know what the fig will come back. Who knows what the figs are going to be here. I mean, you have nothing to base it off of.
This will be very much of a form figure, you'd have to think. They'll make their best guess, I would think. I mean, they can use some of the other data from just if it's a clean variant throughout the other dirt races. Maybe it's not as hard as we think, but it's also one of those races. My gut is it was slow enough early. It's going to be hard for that figure to be anything too impressive. So we'll see how it plays out. Definitely an opposite result. Definitely a result that will contribute to today's pick six potentially being hit, having the logical 6-5 favorite get the job done. Much to the chagrin of our viewer Greg. Sorry that messed you up there. These things happen. The good news is we've still got 3 or 4 more races left today. I said we were going to dive right into the pick six. Let's just pause that to do the day's featured race real quick. What do you think, Matt? Does that make sense to you to do a little bit of a Schuylerville preview and then we'll do the reset?
Absolutely.
All right, excellent. So yeah, traditional opening day featured race. This is one I'm super excited to see what number 9 Summer Promise can do. I like this debut. I like the fact that pace figure wise, she was getting faster throughout that race. Now, granted, it was also not the fastest pace, so that's what you're supposed to do, but it did suggest to me at least that the added ground will be okay. And I really like the outside draw for Summer Promise, giving Luis Saez, who's already off to a hot start, options from the outside in a race where surely there's going to be plenty of other speed. Maybe he can go to the lead, maybe he can sit just off, but I think he definitely is sitting on the button, as it were, as far as the jockey gamesmanship goes in this year's running of the Schuylerville. Who do you like in there?
No, I mean, look, I think she's among the likelier winners for all the reasons you laid out. I brought it up on my show at the beginning of the week. Lucas's numbers with first time starters, they're just not good. This isn't what he does. So when you have one that bucks the trend and goes and wins as impressively as she did, and when you look at her pedigree, which says she wants to go longer, she doesn't even want to do this. Usually those are things that point to a good quality horse. So she was right there. I was torn between her and I thought Adora, the 3 was interesting. One of 3 in here for Cassie. Big speed. I'm going to assume that's what the plan will be here again. The fig is light, but when you go back and take a look, I had written down 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. They all came back to improve their buyer next out by 14, 2, 31, 39, and 20. So part of me thinks that the buyer could be a little on the light side from that debut. Let's say conservatively it's 5 to 10 points light. That puts her up into that sort of 65, 70 range. I could see a scenario in which if she is aggressively ridden, that she could be the controlling speed in here. The problem is if it's not her, one of the other Cassies in here, me and my shadows got some early foot too. She's the one that, depending on what you look at, some people either think she's going to win by 100 or, we're going to find out about the surface, this, that, and the other. She was out there on a soft pace. I thought at Woodbine. I think she's going to just need to show something different than what she did in that career debut. So I was between the 3 and the 9. I think the 9's a more likely winner. I could see the 3 being interesting if she goes off somewhere around 10-1. I don't know if that'll happen or not with a couple scratches, but that was me, 3-9-9-3.
I like it. And Dylan Davis riding aggressively. You probably have the right jock to give the right kind of ride for what you're looking for. And one who, despite the fact that he won a bajillion races at Belmont, probably isn't going to catch any money extra at Saratoga just because there's so many other ways to go. I like that as an alternative suggestion as a horse that could potentially be a sneaky best of speed at 6, 8, 10-1, something like that.
Yeah, and again, for me, so much of it is, and I actually threw out the idea of sort of a double boxed superfecta of Adora, Summer Promise, in first and second, and then underneath, who did I have? I had Janis Joplin and Just Cindy. Janis Joplin is really sneaky to me. She's extremely light on figs, but for her to run the way that she did in the debut and then be a private purchase out of that, you pick up Pratt here second time out. On paper, she has no chance. But I thought she was green and showed enough in that debut that maybe at the very least she can come along and pick up some pieces. And I thought Just Cindy was fine as well. I have no real objection to her. But, I threw out that idea of a 3-9-3-9, 1-5-1-5 superfecta. Wouldn't cost you that much. Take a shot, see if it happens.
No, I love that idea. Let's do a little reset here. Then we'll come back at the end of the show. We'll do the leaderboard one more time before we go off air, and we'll bid everybody adieu. Hello and welcome to the Late Week in the Money Players podcast, which is actually happening during the midst of our Horse Player Happy Hour. We encourage everybody listening to the Late Week show to participate next week in Horse Player Happy Hour. We do that show for our friends at the Breeders' Cup. It costs $20 to play. All the money, the house cut, goes to Thoroughbred Aftercare in the form of the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. The game will go live probably on Tuesday. Horseplayers.com. Again, $20 to play, and we're going to do an all Saratoga format once again, starting with what do we start with? Race 3 or 4? It's probably going to be about 2:00 race 3. That's my best guess as of now. Go back, check it out. Want to make sure we get as many people involved as possible. And I am here on the show just about every week, except when one of us is off running around somewhere crazy, with In the Money Media's very own and TV's Matt Bernier. Matt, what's going on?
Looking forward to opening weekend at Saratoga, Pete. Like you say, we're talking about it right now during happy hour, but looking ahead, hopefully the weather cooperates. I think we've got some good racing. And boy, to me, Saratoga, Del Mar will open next weekend. these two seasons are all about 2-year-olds and what could be still to come. And I think we've got a really good one on Saturday in the Sanford.
Yeah, we'll get to it. Let's kick off with the pick six. It starts off in race number 6, 3:55 Eastern, the scheduled post time for this $25,000 claiming race going 7 furlongs on the dirt. Matt, how do you want to light this candle?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't have a real strong opinion in here, but I did narrow it down to 2. I think the 3, Chris and Dave, has an opportunity at least to bounce back to his best. The most recent run, obviously not great, but you get back to the run 2 back against $32,000 claimers. You take a look at some of the figs. I know No Burn regressed 10 points, and the 4th place finisher regressed 23 points, something crazy like that. This horse, last time he was at the claiming $25,000 level, went out and won by almost 4 lengths. So I think this is where he fits at this point in his career. I also like the slight turn back in distance. And I don't want to say reluctantly, but I'm going to use Alcools on the far outside for Linda Rice and Flavien Prat. The horse is just in rock solid form. I don't have a concern about the distance. And at this point, I kind of want horses that are more in form than out of form. I made the case for Chris and Dave, who you could say is a bit out of form. But again, it's only been 3 races since he last won. So those are the 2 that I was going to really kind of push my chips in on.
I get it. Certainly runners that make sense there in this race that'll kick off the pick 6 on Saturday. Let me just check my notes here because I did this thing where I wrote something. I think I wrote something a little bit goofy in my notes, and I just want to catch up. I'm in the right place now. I put Alcools right on top. We've got the same 2 horses actually. I put Alcools right on top. Looks like a good candidate to get the 3-peat here, and I think could just prove the best speed going on with things in a race that doesn't look to have that much early lick. Second start since being claimed back by Linda Rice, and just looks like a much easier group than this one faced last time. And as for Chris and Dave, that was just such a non-effort last time, such a no-shot situation. But the previous races put Chris and Dave right there. So yeah, we're rowing in together here with the opening leg of this pick 6, and then we'll go to race number 7, where we've got these allowance runners going 7 furlongs, and we've got a huge favorite who I'm not going to spend much money trying to beat, and that's number 5, Reinvestment Risk, dropping out of stakes company, and looks to me to be in against overmatched allowance horses. Klarovich stable, candidate to win the owner's title, so I don't read anything negative into the seemingly very conservative placement of a runner who could probably hang against better. I think this horse is going to be on or near the front and very tough to down. Do you have anything more creative when it comes to this one?
No, the only thing I'd add to Reinvestment Risk, he's unfortunately one of those horses that's in a bit of a pickle at this point because he's not really a 6 furlong type for a race like the Vanderbilt. He's much more of a 7 furlong type. So you probably just have to wait for the 4 go. If he's got conditions and he's eligible, you might as well run him here. I think he's the most likely winner by a long shot. The only other one that I was mildly interested in, I know people like Baby Yoda, the horse down on the inside, Disco Pharaoh. I think you can, if you squint, you can get back to some of his best races. I think Ansarin still has a bit of ability. I don't think he's totally a reclamation project. I drew a line through the most recent run. Clearly something broke there as far as the equipment is concerned, so don't hold that against him. 2 back, he ran on a wet track, which you can't stand up on. 3 back, I know overall all the horses, or 4 out of the 5, regressed pretty substantially, but I think that number is relatively close to being legit simply because in the run prior, he earned a 90 against 40 claimers. So if, let's say, Reinvestment Risk regresses to a low to mid 90, I think Ansarin at least has a back race that's good enough and could get there. And you should get, I would say, high single digits somewhere thereabouts. So he was the only other one I was really interested in.
Sometimes they'll tilt the board when you have a horse like Reinvestment Risk in this spot, and you could get a 10 easily, I would think, on Ansarin. So I think that's a very interesting long shot that you make a compelling case for that I'll at least run a couple of lines through. Race number 8 is a grade 1. It's the Diana. We're going 1 mile and an 1/8 on turf for these fillies and mares. And Chad Brown, you think he holds a strong hand in here? He's got 4 of the 6. Who are you going with, Matt?
Feels like certain days over in Europe where it's Aidan O'Brien and Charlie Appleby, and now in the United States it's Chad Brown and Charlie Appleby. I feel like you either use all 4 Chads or you take a stand with one of them, and maybe that's again a bit short, narrow-minded. I ended up going back to Rougier. She was god awful in the New York. She was really, really bad, but I think there's a scenario in which some folks have brought it up. Maybe she actually wants to go slightly shorter than what she had in that run or in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf last year. I just thought her bogey was so good. And I have a hard time getting that out of my brain because if she runs that, she can beat Bleecker Street. I firmly believe that. Chad has always sort of handled Bleecker Street as if he doesn't typically or genuinely think that she is grade 1 elite status. Rougier, I think, has always supposed to been cut from that kind of cloth. I'm going to go that direction. I'm going to give her another shot. I would stand on her as a lone A because I feel like you got to take a stand somewhere.
Rougier's the Chad that I'm the most interested in, but I was going to go the Appleby route in this spot with the 2 Creative Flair. Made the seasonal debut, a winning one. That was a strong enough figure, very competitive with her best. And I like that she showed improved early speed. That can sometimes be an indicator of a runner who's going to move forward as well, especially when she's got the obvious condition second up of the season. Not an easy spot, but I'm a bit seduced. David Aragona is so good at the morning line, making this one 8-1. I would pounce at that price, and I'd happily take 6-1. I mean, she doesn't look any worse than a 4-1 type chance to me as an improver for Charlie Appleby, who's been so dominant in North America, winning with basically half his runners with a big positive return on investment. So I'll probably back up with the 1, 4, and 6 of the Chad team for sort of reasons you intimated, maybe a little bit willing to take kind of a stand against Bleecker Street. But Rogier, I think, is the interesting one off that idea of the last was just too bad to be believed. And given her purchase price at the sale and what she's accomplished, I would expect a bounce back from her. And, it would be no surprise to see her win by 2.
Do you buy into the idea of sort of a Euro bounce?
It used to be much more of a thing than it is. But it was interesting. It didn't look like the distance Goddard beat. It looked real bouncy, didn't it? Yeah. So it might be less of a bounce because of the second race in North America, just as that bogey was so good. And I mean, you talk to horsemen about this and they believe it chapter and verse at this point, that sometimes these big efforts, it doesn't matter how easy they look, it can take something out of a horse. So I would be a little hesitant to fully embrace that, but I can't dismiss it out of hand. And I'm definitely interested to see what she can do this time around.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that I just thought she was so good. And no, maybe she wasn't beating elite company in that bogey, but she beat good enough horses that the form of that field is held up for the most part. So again, if she's going to be the second choice in here or, somewhere in that 5-2, 3-1 range, I got to give her another look or at least one more chance to prove herself.
And David's guess 3-1 would be very appealing at that.
Yeah.
Tricky race to make a morning line on. I wonder if he's right that bettors will gravitate towards Bleecker Street off that huge win in that same race, the New York. I mean, that was a big win, quickening so well off of that, blue-coated middle part of the race. Bleecker Street's got to prove it to me one more time. I mean, the figures just aren't good enough for the price that she's going to be. I'm okay in this instance taking a shot against in the Diana. Should we move it? Any other thoughts on that one, Matt, or should we move it on forward to this allowance race?
Nope, we move on.
All right, 3-year-olds, 1 1/8 on the inner turf, and we've got a big full field in this one as well. Matt, we'll keep it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a race that if it's either you're firmly in Fort Ticonderoga's camp or you're looking at it saying anything can happen. I'm probably kind of contradicting myself and going a little bit in between. I think Fort Ticonderoga is a horse that you probably have to use just based on the way that he ran in that maiden score. Thought he looked so good. Yes, he had a fast pace to run at, but it looked like a good thing, and he beat a 3-5 Chad in that spot. If it's not him, though, I know it was a blanket finish in that N1X at Belmont on June 18th, but I thought Analogy ran really well. And the other two that I would use would be Analogy and Credit Event. Of the two, I think Analogy ran better because I don't think that pace was particularly strong. And for this horse to settle at the back of the field, yes, he saved ground every inch of the way, but to kick on the way that he did, I thought it was a sort of an encouraging effort. And I think he can take a step forward. He's nearly paired up by our top 77, 76. We're splitting hairs at that point. I think he's going to move forward. And if it's not Fort Ticonderoga, I think it's probably Analogy. So my air quotes pick would actually be Analogy because I want to go for a little bit of an upset. But from a pick standpoint, I'd use Analogy. I would use Fort Ticonderoga, and I suppose as a backup, I would use Credit Event. They're only separated by a nose in that finish, and Chad goes to a little bit of an equipment change here for this spot. Maybe that gets him back, but Credit Event through 3 starts has yet to really take that big step forward. And for someone like Chad, when they haven't improved pretty dramatically quickly, I start to wonder a little bit about how good they actually are.
2-9 on the A line, 6 on the B line for Matt. I went with Fort Ticonderoga. I wanted to go through and find an alternative because it's never the easiest task first start against winners. But that maiden breaker was stylish enough. I think this horse is going to move forward enough to handle this group. It was a fast pace last time. I think it'll be much closer to the early proceedings here, maybe getting a pretty good trip and quickening past them for the victory. The long shot I did want to use was the number 3 Forever Super, coming here with the wins on synthetic and turf. This is a horse that fits well on numbers, and I thought would be overpriced at odds of around 8-1. Should save all the ground from that rail draw. So I was going to go with the 9 as an A and the 3 as a B. And with that, we'll move on to the race that you had specifically mentioned. You were excited to talk about this field of 12 2-year-olds going 6 furlongs in the Grade 3 Sanford. Are you still mulling this one, or did you land on a pick?
Well, I mean, so I had written down 5 numbers, but I do have one horse in particular I want to bet in here. The numbers I went with are 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9. Okay. I guess we can go in opposite order. Andiamo e Firenze, I thought it was visually really solid, but my concern is that was on a sloppy track, and we typically see sort of those spread out fields whenever you get kind of a wet track. Certain horses take it, others don't. But boy, he looked good. And from a number standpoint, he's arguably as fast as anyone in here. Major Dude, I thought looked really good, breaking the maiden for Pletcher down at Monmouth. Johnny V was down there to ride that day. He needed a little bit of encouragement, but I thought it was an educational debut, should improve. Certainly needs to step up on Figs. Great Navigator. I would love to see this horse win. You're going to get a price on a horse that is one of the faster ones coming into it, but goes out for a lower profile barn. I love the way that the horse broke on the debut and went on and did things as sort of professionally as he did. Forte, I have no knocks. I really don't have anything to add. He's fast. It's Pletcher. It's a rat. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But the horse I ended up going with is the 6, Most Strike. Goes out for Brad Cox, Florent Giroux. The numbers, depending on what you look at, time form compared to Beyer. Time form has the race a little bit slow. Beyer has it respectable at a 70. I go through the 7th, 9th, and 10th place finishers moved up 9 points, 24 points, and 34 points in their next starts. So factoring in that the race has moved forward for the most part from a form standpoint, and Most Strike was the only part of the pace to stick around late, I thought it was an encouraging debut. I think this horse has the ability to sit without being pace dependent or going to the lead. I like Most Strike in here.
You make a very compelling case. How would you grade out those others into A's and B's?
So I would probably say Most Strike is an A, Forte is an A, Great Navigator is an A, and then backups would be Major Dude and Andiamo e Firenze.
6, 4, 3 on the top line, leaving it 2-9 on the backup line.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Beautiful. I went with Forte, another race where I'm sort of feeling a little bad going with the horse I think is going to be the favorite because it's competitive, but I think this could be a backable favorite. Maybe no less than 5-2, maybe 3-1. This horse fits best for me on figures, all things considered, and I do love has shown the ability to pass horses and did so without a particularly great setup. Wasn't some, just come running late in a race that was collapsing run. Interesting note here that was in DRF. Todd Pletcher, great as he is, does not have the best record with maiden 2-year-olds going right into graded stakes on the dirt. But the line I wrote in my attheraces.com column, in this case, I'm going to go with the idea that stats don't win races, horses do. And I'm sticking with Forte because this isn't going to be a 6-5 favorite. If it was, I think that stat would probably give me pause at that point. But the way things are, I'm sticking with it. Does that stat factor in your reckoning of the race at all? I'll pull up the exact stat and give credit to the closer look writer who popped it in there as well.
No, not particularly. I mean, I think you just have to go back to last year with Witt. Didn't Witt win off of a Belmont maiden debut? Comes right back into this race and wins. So I think, to your point, everything is it goes back to the Lucas stat I threw out when we were talking about the Schuylerville, which is happening on opening day. When a horse bucks the trend, that to me is a positive. That's something that I actually want to look at and say, okay, well, we've got something here. I know this stat is specifically for this race here, but I thought the horse was really, really strong visually. I'm going to be most interested in, honestly, down the road, what he turns into, because there's a lot of grass in the pedigree. And it makes me wonder if down the road he ends up becoming a turf horse. But right now, with as good as he's been, I mean, there's no reason not to run on the dirt on the main track until he proves otherwise.
So here's that stat that I just pulled, and let's credit where credit's due. It's a 2-year-old race, so it is David Aragona, actually, who's getting a lot of calls on this show. He pulled Pletcher being 3 for 24, not, by his own standards, very meh, with just a 109 $2 ROI, with 2-year-old last out debut winners in graded stakes dirt sprints over the past 5 years. So it's an interesting that when you see a trainer who does well in everything and there's a category that they don't do so well in, it's something to notice. But again, for me, the big difference maker is this isn't a 4 to 5 we're lumping on, a 6 to 5 we're lumping on. This is a horse that should be, I think, every bit of that 5 to 2 or 3 to 1. We are running low on time, so we will continue to speed through this pick 6 with race number 11. The pay leg, $35,000 claimers, mile and a 16th on the turf. Fillies 3 and up. Matt, how are we going to get paid?
Perfect way to wrap this thing up. I have no opinion in this race. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. The only one I found interesting was Diva Ready. But even having said that, I don't love this horse. I could see this horse running 6th. It's not like she's got some tremendous edge on the field. The problem is, if you don't take a stand, I'm using 9 of them in here. So, I didn't have an opinion. I'm not going to try to sell someone some goods that I don't truly believe in. I think Diva Ready makes sense, but I don't trust her really all that much in the grand scheme.
I'm tempted in my plus notes to write that your top pick is technically Diva Ready, but for B's, you want to use as many as you can afford. Is that about right?
I mean, how much money you got in your pocket, basically?
I put Diva Ready on top 2, the pace advantage, coupled with the drop in class, racing for a tag for the first time. I think Flavien Prat's going to send her to the front, and I think she's got enough finish to stay there. I think it's interesting seeing Flavien Prat show up here, too. It may be an indicator that he's really looking to get super busy in as many races as possible at this Saratoga meet, as opposed to just being a bit more of a specialist. We'll see, cherry picking, looking for Breeders' Cup mounts, whatever, stakes mounts. We'll see how it plays out. I think Diva Ready is the one. There are a bunch of others you can make cases for. I'll talk about 2 of them off of pretty similar angles, horses that were closing into blue fractions last time out, the 3 Noble Enterprise and the 11 Kemba. I thought they were both worthy of inclusion. And I like the strategy of pressing up an A, who I think is going to control the pace, with then a couple of horses that will be suited, who are going to be prices if I happen to be wrong or it just doesn't play out that way. It's sort of that attempt of trying to get the best speed and the best closer that I try to do in my horizontal wagers. So that's what we'll do with that one. And if you're watching on the late week show, now we'll go to a break. And if you're watching on Horseplayer Happy Hour, we'll take one more look at that leaderboard, answer one quick question, and we'll be out of here. All right, let's see how things have changed. We have Steve Nemitz still clearly in first place, since we just had that favorite come in the interim. John Buckley, Michael Cavana, Bruce D'Agostini, Ernest Hay Jr., Nancy Spence, who's actually the one who asked the question I want to get to real quick, Amanda Couples, Michael Oldham, Trenton DeWitt, Togo Travaglia, Pete Dressens, Kirk Rockwell, Matthew Abbott, Pete Cook, Steve McNatten, Tyler Sisk. Is that it? Is it 16 who are going to go forward?
Yes.
Today? Do I have that right?
16, and then I believe you got some breakage after that.
Oh, we'll read the breakage people too. Emmett Burns, Joe Petralia, Michael Cavana again, Steve Nemitz again, Steve McNatten and Mac Gabbard. I'll read them just because they were on the screen when I started. So Nancy's question was a Del Mar question. I'd love to do some Del Mar preview content next week. Maybe we'll try to do a special show looking at some betting angles for Del Mar in that spot. Obviously, we could do a whole show on it, but Matt, I'll throw it to you. Are there any particular angles or anything you're looking at for this Del Mar meet?
I guess the one thing I would say is just Saratoga is a different animal in that you get connections from all over the place showing up. For the most part, day in and day out at Del Mar, it's the connections you would see at Santa Anita or Los Al. They're just shifting racetrack. I think many of the same trends kind of play. Speed going 2 turns, certainly in Southern California, especially at Santa Anita, but Del Mar plays as well. You'd rather be forward. You better be within about a length at the pace call, so going into the far turn for a 2-turn mile race. But beyond that, I mean, look, I'm going to be fascinated to see how Baffert's barn does. And the same goes for next week with the Haskell, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure. It sounds like Taba's supposed to be coming back for that spot. If he gets back to the Taba that we saw prior to the Derby, yes, he has a big chance to win that race. I don't care if Jack Christopher's in there. I don't care if early voting's in there. I don't care who else is in the race. If he comes back and is as good as he was before he went away, obviously any of his horses have a big chance, not just at Monmouth, but certainly during the Del Mar meet. So I think for me, big picture Del Mar, don't overthink it. It's very much same circuit, same players. Go at it that way.
Yeah, you would expect him to be loaded on the 2-year-old front. I haven't had a chance to read the Jay Privman annual article about, maybe it hasn't even popped yet, but there's great coverage in the Forum on the 2-year-old racing at Saratoga and Del Mar. That's one thing I'd say, take a look at, see who's getting hyped up in both those articles. That's a source of winners year in, year out. Going to look to have both those guys on Baby Talk to further that discussion. And then the one other angle I'll just throw in there is with Pratt riding in the East Coast, there's a power vacuum. Who's going to fill it? Reese Belize sounding like he's going to stay out there. Is he going to blow up? Is Hernandez going to blow up? Let's see what happens. It's just something, it's not really an angle like I'm telling you, hey, go bet on this, but it's something that I want to pay attention to.
I would keep an eye in that respect, keep an eye on Giroux because he's going out there. So,
yep.
He'll pick up, I would assume, I don't want to say many of the mounts that Pratt would have had, but kind of in that same ballpark.
Pratt light.
Yeah, right.
Oh, pretty. He'll get his table at the Pomplamoose and everything. All right, great stuff, Matt. That is all the time we have on the show. We thank everybody out there for supporting Horseplayer Happy Hour. We thank our friends at the Breeders' Cup, especially Haley and Justin. Dave Vader, special shout out to him for helping out getting that leaderboard put together. We're going to be having that on the shows throughout the rest of the season. Really looking forward to being here with y'all through the Breeders' Cup. We've got a lot of great stuff coming on the In the Money Media Network. Check out Matt. You should be following him on Twitter. You should be listening and watching his show every single week. Some of the best handicapping and horse racing content out there. And hey, occasionally he'll give out a live 40-1 pick in the golf too. So, you can enjoy that. Going to be real special next week with us down on the Jersey Shore. We'll figure out exactly what the content plan is, but you're going to want to be here for it. This show has been a production of the Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media. On our side, we'll thank producer AJ for ably filling in. We'll thank our business manager, Drew Coatney, our chief creative officer, Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. May you win all your photos.